Bonjour, bienvenue aux Abattoirs. Je suis Annabelle Ténèze, je suis la directrice des Abattoirs Musée Frac Occitanie Toulouse. Je vous accueille aujourd'hui aux Abattoirs dans le cadre du Forum de septembre qui accompagne la saison Africa 2020. Ce forum fait écho aux expositions actuellement présentées dans notre institution et ce forum a pour thème « Créer les archives de l'art, il était une fois, il sera une fois ». Nous sommes aujourd'hui dans la section du forum consacrée aux revues et aux bibliothèques d'art contemporain africain. Et je suis ravie d'accueillir avec nous Julia Grosse et Missla Libsekal. Bonjour à vous deux.
Bonjour.
Merci d'être là. Donc, cette conversation, je le précise pour ceux qui nous regardent, aura lieu en anglais, mais elle sera sous-titrée. Donc, vous pouvez la suivre dans les deux langues. Je vais dire quelques mots à propos de nos deux invités. Donc, Julia Grosse est historienne de l'art, écrivaine, critique d'art, basée à Berlin. Et avec Yvette Mutumba, elles ont fondé en 2014, lors de la première Biennale de Dakar, le magazine d'art, puis la plateforme Contemporain. Missla Libsekal est commissaire d'exposition d'origine éthiopienne, basée à Vancouver au Canada, et elle est co-organisatrice du forum et de l'exposition Au-delà des apparences, il était une fois, il sera une fois aux Abattoirs. Et donc, nous allons entamer cette conversation et je laisse Missla commencer les questions auprès de Julia. Merci à vous deux.
Merci.
So, Missla, I'd like to begin with the first question. Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome, Julia. We're really pleased to have you here today. I want to begin with this idea of epiphanies, you know, the catalyst when acting and doing becomes imperative. You know, together with Annabelle, we were thinking about how the exhibition Magicien de la Terre that was curated by the art historian Jean-Hubert Martin in 1989 was one of the catalysts for Revue Noire project, the editorial project that started in '91. And in my case, you know, it was as an art worker, the spark for myself was when I was visiting my ancestral homeland, which is Asmara in Eritrea. And I was walking down the streets and I was really amazed to encounter the modernist architecture that makes up Asmara, which is over 700 buildings. And it really touched me at that moment that was largely not part of the collective consciousness, which was what led me to start thinking about writing. Mm-hmm. So how about for yourself, for Yvette and your collaborator and yourself, how did writing about art come to you and what was your epiphany? Was it an ellipsis like ourselves or was it something else?
Yeah, thanks again for the invitation, first of all. And epiphany, yeah, we had each of our, let's say, moments before we even met. For example, I did kind of dive more deep into all of these contexts and questions that kind of, you know, were after me when I did my MA on Kara Walker, the American artist focusing or kind of, you know, got popular by her, first of all, format of the cutouts, bringing across really these very complex topics of slavery history, violence, dependency, etc. So this was my kind of entry point into, let's say, an artistic practice from Black perspectives. And Yvette comes from a, you know, art historian. We were both trained quite classically, let's say, in a Western context where, let's say, focusing on non-white, in our case, Black art was quite unusual still. And the funny thing is, before we even met, we both had the experience that at our universities in Germany, it was quite hard to focus on these topics. For example, in my case, I had to consult another professor from the Americanistic, from the American Studies department to supervise my MA master on Kara Walker, because in art history they were like, we can't help you, which was quite irritating, but normal at that point. Things have changed now. And a bit for Yvette as well, she had to go to London for her PhD to focus on her perspective or her interest in a Black artistic perspective. So this was kind of not a positive epiphany, but more like, yeah, how we experienced working with these topoi, and then how we came, let's say, together and started Contemporary End was more like that. We obviously, you know, travel to diverse African countries and have family backgrounds, etc., to particular countries, and always had or felt and saw that the artistic production is obviously massive, yeah. But we were kind of a bit like you as well, Missla, with your magazine Another Africa. We missed this kind of discourse and visibility of all of these practices in the art media we were reading at that time. Let's say Freeze magazine, Art Forum, etc. These discourses and these voices and practices didn't just take place in these magazines, and we kind of thought, you know, we want to create a platform that ideally brings these voices together. Of course, we were fans of Revue Noire, you just mentioned it, of NKA from the US, but tried or were longing for something even more accessible in terms of being not too academic, kind of trying to bring across really complex discourses on art from African perspectives in an understandable way, so that you know, a young person who's maybe 18, interested in art, sitting in, I don't know, either Oslo or Nairobi, can read the content, as well as you know, a literature professor sitting in, I don't know, in this Cape Town or in Cairo. So that was kind of the basic idea behind how we started it, and which kind of made us really enthusiastic as well. Starting this project, building or focusing on this idea of a growing network of voices from Africa, but as well the global diaspora. So this is always something which kind of was closely connected and still is in our practice, that we have this, it's not a focus on artistic production from Africa only, but always in relation to the global diaspora, because you can't really, you can't, you know, separate it really. So yeah, this was kind of how we came together.
It's the vision is large, and it's quite fantastic how far you guys have actually grown in the work that you're doing, especially with the contemporary and Latina version as well, the fact that it's published in so many different languages. And certainly that's something that's also possible with the internet, and something that we'll hopefully touch on a bit later. You know, this idea of invisibility and access, which I absolutely understand, is something I think that kind of relates to this idea of libraries. And libraries are a recurring theme and a subject of attention for Contemporary and in your editorial and your education, and also your projects. Can you elaborate on this commitment and focus for yourselves?
Yes, so the idea of the library has always been, as you say, important to us, and we kind of started, you know, we had many ideas. Some of them we still haven't realized, which is a shame, but it's still on our list, hidden somewhere in a, you know, in the shelf. But one idea, for example, even before we started, for example, with the series Inside the Library, one idea was to kind of make texts, speaking of NKA, Revue Noire, etc., making texts visible online. You mentioned online already, which is very important to us in terms of accessibility, and to have this kind of online library on Contemporary and bringing together all of these very important texts and voices and essays, etc., which you would normally you could access, but maybe through university online catalogs, etc., when you're a student, for example. So not as a normal person who's not in this academic context could access, I don't know, text from Third Text, for example, and this magazine, and all of these magazines. And this is always one idea we thought would be great to have this kind of access on Contemporary End by bringing together these selected important voices of these magazines in one database. But this hasn't happened yet, but that is an ambitious vision. I even spoke to Salah Hassan, etc., to all of these guys already, and they love the idea, but it's as you say, it's very ambitious and it costs money, etc. So, but this was this already went a little bit in this direction, which we then realized in a, let's say, smaller scale that we, when we were traveling, always try to visit local or grassroots community libraries as well, be it in Dakar or, I don't know, in Cairo, etc. And always, or in Lagos, and always thought, oh God, these books, you know, these books or pamphlets or fanzines, they're, you know, they're treasures is such a horrible word, but these collections focusing on contemporary or modern art from Africa in this case, were so interesting and precious and rich. And you know, these small libraries have these collections, and obviously don't have an visibility such as the British Library, etc., who claim to have the knowledge, you know, a global knowledge of the world of art, for example. And we just realized it's so important to give these small grassroots libraries, or community libraries, more visibility, because they kind of hold these very rare and rich collections of books which you wouldn't find at the British Library or wherever, yeah, at the Staatsbibliothek here in Berlin unnecessarily. So this is why we started this series called Inside the Library, kind of opening or giving a platform to these different libraries, be them in Dar es Salaam or in Morocco or in Cairo, etc. And this is still and was a very beautiful series. The libraries could kind of pick a top 10 of their books and always present them in a really minimal way, just placing them on a you know, flat something like a table, and just take pictures of them and show us the covers, and then add alongside a little text like about the, you know, the content of the books. And we loved that series a lot, and always thought, how can we make this more physical even, yeah? One idea was to connect these libraries and kind of maybe encourage them starting to send books from age, you know, sharing their books. And the other to kind of build something ourselves where we could invite these libraries and invite grassroots libraries to show their books or include their books in our library as well. And this kind of led to the idea of the center slowly, that we thought, okay, how can we make this more physical even, that we can invite people to participate and really go through the books, not only look at them, you know, online, but really look at them and work with them as well. And this is how we, yeah, the center started then almost 4 years ago. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's quite fascinating from something kind of very maybe tangible and small in the sense of an editorial on the website featuring a library. Like, for example, I was looking at you featured Kela Ketla in Johannesburg, and in that piece, Ra speaks about the Medu Art Ensemble, which has been such an important influence for their practice.
Yes.
And then if we think about it, like the Medu Art Ensemble recently had a show, I believe it was in Chicago, and I think the New York Times picked up the publication that was featured in it, saying it was like one of the most important publications. So, you know, something that sort of starts to get more visibility, maybe through something like a web article several years ago. Suddenly, when more people start to know about it, it starts becoming a more important reference. And I think that there's something about freedom, let's say, and addressing invisibilities, whether it's our own personally, and then, you know, this kind of generous idea of building out networks. And I've been thinking about this idea because I think normally we think about libraries as being free spaces, democratic and neutral. But, you know, I think for people like ourselves, once we scratch underneath the surface, you know that from your studies that you try to go to the library within your school and you realize, okay, the resources are not there, whether it's physically in terms of the books or academically in terms of the people, right? And I think we think about this idea of the library as being a kind of welcoming space. And I thought this was a very interesting idea when we were thinking and when you were talking to me about the Center of Unfinished Business, being a space that was intentionally designed to be uncomfortable. And so I was thinking, you know, classically in terms of interior design or product design, the strategy is always to make these things comfortable, right? So can you tell us, like, what is this importance of creating an unsettling space? Like, what is the value in this really?
Yeah. First of all, maybe to answer or to reflect on the aspect you said with what is the role of a museum? Is it accessible? Should it be accessible, etc.? Another thing we thought before we came up with the center was always had this idea in our head: is maybe the museum a place? Is the museum a space of encounter? Is the museum not the museum? Sorry, the library. The library, is the library a space of encounter, or is the library maybe even the museum of the future? I don't know. We thought about this back and forth because, you know, of course, it's filled with knowledge. It ideally can be inviting people of all of kind of different kinds and ages to dive into, you know, different perspectives of knowledge. And this is something that kind of led us starting with the center, thinking, okay, should it be an accessible space, because it's not a library really, it's more like a reading room what we have. Yeah, it should be accessible. It should be people can and should participate as well. But at the same time, you said it, it's not user friendly in that way. So it's both at the same time, because the initial idea for the center itself, content wise, so what kind of books should end up in the center, was the idea how traces of colonial oppression, of colonialism, still are, you know, can be found in all parts of our daily life, you know, society, economy, etc. So everything is kind of still infected by colonial legacies. And first of all, we thought, okay, in terms of accessibility, we could do a very unaccessible, very academic reading room, bringing together the usual suspect books on colonialism, post-colonialism, decolonialism, which obviously turns a lot of people off who are like, oh, I'm not an expert. How can I access this, you know, these topics, you know, if we have only very academic books there. And then we thought, you know what, because the thing is, as I said, and as we all know, colonial legacies or traces kind of infect so many people, so many things, from Wall Street to fashion, to hip hop music, everything, yeah. And this kind of opened up for us a whole new world of possibilities in terms of what kind of books we can bring in. We can bring in books on Creolean, you know, food. We can bring in books on hip hop, on streetwear, on Wall Street, etc. And this makes the library, on the one hand, very accessible again, because you access or can speak to many people who are like, oh, very interested in different aspects of the library, or a book on expressionism. What has this to do with colonial legacies? And at the same time, coming back to the unfriendly or less user-friendly aspect, the topic itself of colonialism is obviously not a user-friendly topic. And this is something we not only wanted to bring across in the, let's say, diversity of books who have to do with this topic, but as well in the architecture. So that we thought, okay, when you sit in this space and read a book on colonialism, you shouldn't, you know, lounge in a nice pillow and have a nice warm tea in your hand, yeah. But more kind of that this problematic topic obviously is reflected in the space you're in as well, so that your body can kind of not feel, but should kind of react to this unpleasant topic as well. So this is why we always thought, okay, this has to be reflected in the architecture and in this initial structure, for example. And it's a little bit like in how the structure looks in the exhibition now, is that, for example, people don't have the books in front of them, they can take it out. Of course they do, but as well there's some, you know, higher areas where they really have to, you know, to take a lot of effort to reach them, for example. So this kind of involving the body into this action of reading is always very important to us. Or, for example, that the sitting and reading doesn't happen on a really loungy chair, but on uncomfortable, hard, minimal chairs as well. So this is always something we thought has to come in one thought and in one iteration, in a way, one package. Yes.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that, the artist who we both know, Nastia Mosquito, spoke about, this idea that it's only when you're uncomfortable are you able to change. So I think this idea of discomfort being something as part of growth, and something that each individual has to experience themselves to come to knowledge I think is quite an interesting idea that you've not only thought about in terms of obviously the book selection, but also the physical experience.
Yes.
And maybe also, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, maybe I can add as well, because he said I'm feeling uncomfortable, and we always speak of irritation. Yeah, irritation, or sometimes he's, as Nastia says, we always tend to talk of educate, because we don't want to educate. It's not a didactic library. It's not even a library. It's a reading room, because we don't have no bibliography. There's no A for Africa in this corner and B for, or E for expressionism in that corner. This is the nice thing about it, that we kind of irritate by, of course, in a first round, curate these books, putting maybe irritating titles next to each other, but not in a didactic way, but more with this idea to, we sometimes say educate through irritation, or education through irritation. A bit, and it goes a bit in his direction, so that people are like, oh, what has this book to do here, and why is this next to this book? And this kind of opens up hopefully potential thoughts for a new narration, or new thoughts about, okay, why did they put this there? This has to do, this has to mean something, and that this irritation maybe triggers something in the visitors.
Yeah, for myself, one of the references that I often lean into is, Chimurenga as a project, and the kind of ideas that they produce. And one of the things they talk about is like not having to describe about Africa, but rather how we imagine and experience it. So, for somebody like myself, it absolutely makes sense to think about Kendrick Lamar together with James Baldwin, together with, I don't know, Haile Selassie, for example, the Emperor of Ethiopia. Because that is really how we experience lives, life and bodies of knowledge. And I think there is something very generous about producing it in that way, so that anybody who participates or has contact with this type of knowledge can reflect about their own prejudices, really, and work through them, as it were. So this idea of like the fugitive library, which is, I think, the Center of Unfinished Business really falls into this kind of space as a project that's something that's it's itinerant. It responds to exclusion and oppression. Is something quite strong, because as I was reading about this idea, it allows you to operate outside of the typical power structures, as you're talking about how a typical library operates. So I was very interested about this idea that this center responds to context. Typically, it's built out of 3 libraries, meaning that it's from the Inviting Institutions Library, a community partner library, as well as the Contemporary Anne Library. Can you tell us about the logic of these kind of 3 components, how you came up with this idea, and what kinds of knowledge or knowledge production is possible? And if it's easier for you, maybe you can use the IFA example as the first one. So I think it's quite interesting that it's 3 libraries then that come into one.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's interesting, because every iteration, every dialogue, no, it's not even a dialogue, it's a trialogue, so it's 3 parties, but it's always that, for example, the inviting institution is approaching us if we want to exhibit or show the library in their space, and it's always that the first step is that we ask for their library, or their collection of books, because however big or small the institution is, all of them have a particular big or small selection of books, and this is one very important first step that we always say. We need to start with the dialogue between our very particular collection of books from, you know, the C&N collection, a dialogue with the institution's library, because, for example, the last bigger iteration we had was last year in Museum Ludwig in Cologne, and they have a huge art history library, really thousands of books. And what the institution always needs to be, let's say, open for is that we go into this library and pick or get out books who are fantastic, but as well who are problematic as well. So this is always something the library needs to be, or the institution needs to be open for, that we, for example, in the case of the Cologne art history library, we found some books focusing on German discovery-wise or discovery-focused German photographers going to Namibia and doing portraits of the, you know, of the communities there, etc. So books, obviously, we found highly problematic, but were part of their collection, and so these books would go into the center as well. So as an institution, you need to be in kind of open to open up in a way that you show the visitors parts of your museum who are maybe not pleasant, yeah, or not very contemporary, etc. And the third, as you say, the third angle is that that leads a bit, you know, back to our Inside the Library series, that we want to include these local libraries who do exist in all of these cities, you know, be it in Toulouse or in Cologne or in Vienna or you know, in all of these cities or in Berlin, where we had the, you know, center installed. And the idea is always a bit like I explained already, to shed light or give visibility to these very important collections who are normally, you know, out of these contexts of what is a library and where does the knowledge sit, etc. When it comes to these discourses, you know, we always tend to mention the big libraries in these cities, but never these important community libraries, who very often, you know, have this very rare focus on discourses or artistic production from African perspective, or from Roma and Sinti perspectives, from different minority perspectives, who are extremely important but not really visible. And this is always why we want to include them into our iterations. And this is kind of what brings these three voices together in a way into a very interesting dialogue, I have to say. And yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the iteration where one of the writers actually also wrote about, I guess it's the bust of Nefertiti, which is apparently held in Germany, which sounds like a hot button item. I mean, you having grown and lived in Germany,
yes.
I mean, can you kind of give us a sense about this type of artifact and this type of, you know, irritation, I guess you could say, because obviously, you know, I can see how it could easily be polarizing for people, but this type of artifact definitely raises the issue that, you know, we've been seeing across the world around artifacts. Where should they come from, especially when they're, you know, considered colonial, you know, sort of the legacy of colonialism.
Yeah. And the funny thing is with Nefertiti that it's really an endless, ongoing fight, discussion between, arguing between Egypt and Germany, because every side claims to say like, oh, Nefertiti is ours. And, or for example, there has even been a big campaign like some years ago, where a German Berlin campaign, where it says, Nefertiti is a Berliner, like I'm a Berliner, you know, this Kennedy quote, like she's a true Berliner, because, you know, she has been here for a long time now. She has been here for, of course she has, you know, if you realize how long she exists, you know, how many thousands of years, it's just ridiculous. But you know, always this, when it comes to having, you know, to have goods who are not yours, and always this logic behind it, you know, we took really good care of her for a long, long time. So it's us, obviously, because we took care of her for 100 years in a really good way and better than you could ever do. You know, this is always the argument. We could, you know, in terms of conservatory aspects, we took better care, and we have had her for a long time, so it's ours. So, and this is not only, you know, you could apply this to many cases where this is always the argument, you know, how long have we had her, even though it's not ours, but and we took very good care of the object. So it's yeah, it's a wide field. If we would talk about this, we could, you know, we could talk about this for hours, because it's such a wide field.
But you know, I think this this idea of an institution being open to critique by having this type of knowledge with it, occupying within its space, is something maybe not every institution is open to. You know, in the case of for ourselves at Les Abattoirs, we had various challenges. We had the pandemic, so we were really quite unsure whether we'd be able to welcome and you know, this kind of interactive project. How would we deal with that? And also the reality that Les Abattoirs library has like maybe 50 books in total out of 30,000 books. And that in and of itself is obviously means something, right? And we make that visible through the project. So I'm curious, you know, what were the kind of relations or contradictions that you were interested in when you were constituting the library in its context for Beyond What We See?
In a way, we were quite open. So what we didn't necessarily do, for example, now with Cologne or with the IFA gallery, who really hold a big fat library as well in Stuttgart, with fantastic books as well, like, you know, the first book of the catalog of the first Biennale of São Paulo, for example, or Magicien de la Terre. They have really precious books I want to have in my personal library as well. So they have really beautiful books, but we kind of were open. We didn't, for example, access these libraries by looking at books focusing on Africa only. Yeah, this is something we, for example, of course, we checked what do they have with this, you know, focus in the widest sense, but we try to be really open as well, and look in many fields of their selection and topics, because that kind of reflected what we have in our library as well. As I said, books on cooking, on fashion, on Wall Street, etc. So this is something we wanted to have reflected when we looked at their library as well. So we kind of always try to be quite free and not looking for, let's have a look at their expressionism or their ethnographic books or at their Africa books only. So, but rather being really open to see, okay, what is their tendency? What kind of books did they collect a lot? Where are the gaps as well? For example, we had in one iteration in Haus HKW, Haus der Kultur in der Welt in Berlin, for example, we were had the big iteration of the center in the context of the festival Transmediale, which is at HKW, and had a look at the Transmediales books as well, a quite small library, maybe 500-600 books. And the tendency was that most of the books were focusing on early 2000 net culture written by white Dutch men, for example. And we thought, okay, this is the tendencies were this is because it tells a lot about the collection practice of these houses as well. Okay, their focus is on net culture, obviously makes sense with the Transmediale, but you know, they didn't really have the tendency or the interest in looking at other voices writing about net culture. So you had books by, as I said, 30 books by white old Dutch men. And this was, you know, we took these books, put them into the center. And of course, the team was a bit like, oh, why these books? But because it reflects what their focus and their area of interest is. And this is something we just want to make visible. Yeah, even if it's irritating, it's even better. And maybe one aspect as well, in terms of participation, of course, we want to invite the people to work with the books, to make copies. We have a copy machine as well, to sit there and read. But as well, we want always encourage them to leave comment or something. It's why we use post-its, you know, this easy, stupid, easy idea and pen and say something. And it was amazing, especially during the last bigger iteration in Cologne, where the house or the museums in Germany were open for like 1 or 2 months, so really a short period of time, and people stormed into the museums, I have the feeling. Plus, it was the time right after the murder of George Floyd, and you could really feel these emotions in the people, in the people's minds and hearts and heads, because, you know, the center, because normally what people do is they put the post-its, you know, on the structure, and this time it looked like a totem. It looked like a, you know, like a holy place or something like this, yeah, because it was covered with these post-its where people were just writing the emotions off their heads and hearts, whatever. And you could really feel that it was an intense moment for all of us, really. And it was really beautiful to see it in these really simple formats of these posts, that you could see, okay, how are the visitors working with this center, and what are they thinking about? So that was really an easy but really beautiful tool, and still is. So yeah, and I hope they're gonna do it as well in Toulouse once the museum is open again. They should.
Yes, we have our fingers crossed that the museum will open, and maybe Annabelle has something to say about that.
Yeah, I do hope that we will open soon, and to be able to have a post-it. I'm quite confident with that, because we are used to let the people write on post-it in les abattoirs, and most of the time we are many post-it, maybe more than the size of the wall. So we are quite confident with that. Yeah, and Julia, I really was interesting the fact that you say there is also the relationship between knowledge and also emotion, because I do think that's also what people have the experience into the museum. Knowledge, but also a lot of emotion, sometimes sadness, sometimes being uncomfortable, sometimes joy, and so on. But also this relationship between both, I think it's also what we try to offer them. And also I was thinking, because of course with the team we open the books, you know, we open the boxes, and one by one we were receiving also the one we were buying. So it was quite also as the first, I would say, the first reader of a library itself, we were. And I was thinking, you have operated a lot, of course, in the German context and in other contexts. Did you think about the library differently in a French context, or do you think it more worldwide?
That's a good question. We always think it as a universal topic, obviously, because it's not a, you know, it's Germany has, you know, has a long history of oppression, as well as every other part and corner and part of the world. But what we always still try to do is, of course, being aware of where we're going, what's the context, what's the location, what's the language. Yeah, for example, in this case, we obviously wanted to include more of our French, because we have many, not tons of, but many French books in our end collection as well, or we brought them all in, for example. And topic-wise, yeah, of course, we adapted it a little bit, because I think it's always important, or we think it's always important to, you know, to look at the context, and in which context are we going. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix. Like, we have this basic books, or this basic focus we want to bring across, you know, these different angles on how to look on colonialism, but always you know, adapted to the location as well. For example, if we are part of or have been invited by the Athens Biennale, which, you know, is focusing on, or in this case we have to think about books in Greek, for example, as well. And yeah, so language is always a thing, and yeah, the context as well, you know, the geographical context where we are. Yeah, because it's, you know, it's all a shared history, but of course every country has a different personal history as well. And of course colonialism in France was a big topic, obviously. So obviously we looked a little bit, and when you looked in your catalog as well, we obviously looked at these topics as well. Yeah.
This kind of reminds me of, you know, Bissy Silva's project Asiko, which was, I think, grew beyond even her imagination. You know, that when she started it, she actually realized that there was such a need that actually it went, you know, much longer. And when she talked about even sort of it coming to an end, people were like, "Oh my God, no! You know, we need to keep this, you know, we need to keep this project going." So I want to, you know, sort of step back from libraries and think about libraries within the context of learning and education, and, you know, kind of like the roadmap to working and professional engagements within the arts. And I know that, you know, for contemporary and education has been a big part of your mandate in terms of running the critical writing workshops, the mentoring programs, et cetera, et cetera. Can you, you know, explain to us a little bit about why why it has been really important for you to develop sustainable relationships with the participants, and what that actually what that means, and what has that meant? You know, so because you've been doing the workshops, I think since 2015. That's when you guys started. Yeah. And I know that the most recent mentorship was in Ghana. It's currently running, I believe, with Bernard, I believe.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he's part of it. Yeah, of course, the aspect of education in the widest sense has always been very close, or not close to our hearts, important to us, because it, you know, it touches the aspect of accessibility again, for us at least. And we thought very early about this aspect of how, because we work with critical writers, obviously, because the network is, you know, the network is the ones who create the content. It's not us writing the articles and the reviews, and it's the local knowledge we are working with, and the local knowledge which is so precious to us, because, you know, we are not sending someone from London to write about the Dakar Biennale, sending him or her there for 3 days and then coming back and writing his or her story from her, let's say, UK perspective about something in Dakar, which is interesting and legitimate and everything, but not our kind of access. We always, or very early, started to work with local writers in the different areas, be it in Kampala or in Dakar, and always thought, obviously, it would be great to have a lot of critical writers, art critics in these different cities. In some cities, you have many art critics. In some, in Khartoum, you have maybe, I don't know, only 4 art critics working there, etc. And this is always something we thought, it would be so nice to work with the next generation of young writers as well, who would be interested in art writing or critical writing about culture. And this is why we came up with this idea to invite local senior writers. This is very important, to work with these youngsters on the ground in these different cities for a couple of days, focusing on the different topics, from, of course, practicing, but as well how to pitch articles, because, you know, many art newspapers, or not many newspapers in African cities don't have, you know, dozens of art and culture pages, for example. That's why it's hard to sometimes pitch an article or a review about an exhibition. We talked about censorship, not us, but the local journalists during these workshops with the youngsters, because censorship is a big topic in some cities as well. And through these workshops, develop this, as you mentioned, this mentoring program, which is just a more sustainable form of really, getting these youngsters on board and getting them to write on a regular basis about art and art production, etc. And this worked out really beautiful, and this is why, you know, we work with many youngsters now on a regular basis. They write for other, you know, enterprises or other art media worldwide now, etc. So this is really beautiful how this kind of developed. And of course it's education, but we always, because we don't see like we're going somewhere and educate people. We would never, for example, go to, you know, do a workshop in Kampala and say, okay, the goal is that, you know, 20 youngsters can write in a European feuilleton style, you know, feuilleton style after these 5-6 days. This is obviously not what we have in mind. But the beauty is that we always don't or didn't and still don't have an in-house style at the end. It's not like the New York Times, everything sounds, you know, has this New York Times sound in each article. And the beauty is at Contemporary End that our in-house style is rather that we don't have a style, but rather are so happy about these different colors of voices in these different articles and writings. You know, someone from Kampala has a completely different style in writing about art than someone from Cairo, for example. And this is a nice thing that we don't iron this out, but rather, you know, celebrate these different styles of writing about art. And the thing is, we had to get used to this as well, and just realizing these are different voices and different styles how to write about art. Someone in, you know, Kampala writes different than someone in Accra, yeah, and because we come from a Western perspective as well, and you know, we have this. We had to unlearn this feuilleton style as well, and this is such a beautiful thing, and this is what, yeah, we think works out really well on Contemporary, and to have these different colors of voices together. And
yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of also a way of decentering, meaning that there is no center. Every place is a local. Every place speaks to itself and speaks to the world, which I think is something that we have found as being quite problematic within discourses around contemporary African and diasporic production. So I mean, that's a very strong and important point. So I think we might have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. I see that we're sort of getting there. So I'm going to just try to talk about, hopefully I can get to two last questions. I'm interested about the project Show Me Your Shelves. You know, once again, it's the idea of the library. It's just coming in a different form. But it seems like here, it's like the circling of the full program. You know, you have artists as well as young writers. You're running the workshops, doing the writing. They're also doing exhibition making, and it kind of culminates also in a special edition of the Contemporary and library. So this all in itself, it sounds like it's quite an amazing thing. But I'm also very interested about this idea of 2 diasporas, meaning that an Afro-German diaspora and an African-American diaspora come together. Like, what is the point? Where do you see is the point of, you know, this bringing these two groups together? You know, as a way of thinking about how to expand the library. Can you elaborate on this? Because you know, a lot of the teaching programs that you do are actually based on resource development on the African continent, but this one is one of the few. Like, I think you've done in Detroit and also in Columbia.
In Houston. Yes. Yeah, the idea really behind this was to again to take the library as a starting point, and in this case looking at the shared history of Germany and the US, of Black Germany and Black US, because of World War II, etc. Obviously, there are connections. For example, in my case, I have been adopted, but my biological parents or parent, the Black one, has been from America, for example. These kind of historical knots that still tie together Germany and the US in a very particular way. And Germany has, the US has always, for example, for young Black Germans, been a very important angle and an important point to look at in terms of, you know, pop culture, music, fashion, you know, hip hop, really, you know, and this is something we found very interesting because, you know, we kind of felt part of this, for young Black Germans to have this, yeah, this country to look up to, at least, you know, 20 years ago, it was like this. And we were interested in how this is still, if this is still a topic, talking to youngsters in their 20s now. And that's why we invited or had different formats as part of this project. As you said, first this critical writing workshop again, where we invited young critical writers from Black critical writers from Germany who exist, obviously, to Detroit and to get into dialogue with the young African American or Black American a group of critical writers, and that was very interesting because they very quickly came to topics around identity, what is different in their idea of definition of identity. For example, it was funny when the Americans realized, okay, in your passport, in your German passport, you don't have to note that you're African, Caucasian, whatever. What is, you don't have this, you just say you're German. This is crazy. You know, you don't define your identity and things like that. It was
your racial identity.
Yes. And of course we don't have this in Germany. And they were like, what? It just says German, this is it, no Asian, blah, 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 blah. You don't have these options. And it was these kind of, you know, dialogues kind of came up really quickly, and this was really interesting for all of them, because obviously if we talk about a global diaspora, we seem to know each other, but obviously we don't know each other. You know, these connections are there and aren't there in a way. Yeah? And the other second layer was to invite Black German artists, young artists, and bring them together or with Black, you know, Black American artists. And the interesting thing was that we thought, you know, I mentioned the library as a museum. We invited them to install their work or develop a work in one of the local community libraries in Detroit and in Houston. And this was really beautiful because, you know, the libraries there, the public libraries are free. You know, you can go in, many people, you know, particular kind of people are there, for example, looking for jobs at because the computers, you know, the internet is free, etc. So you have a different clientele of school kids and people looking for jobs who are there and spend their time there, or, you know, just read Oprah Winfrey magazines and things like this. So there's the iterations in these kind of libraries for very public spaces was yeah, very interesting for us and for the Black Germans as well, but as well for the Americans, because normally most of them didn't present their work in a, let's say, library in this kind of context outside the white cube, and that was for them as well very nice, especially with the ones who did performance and really interact with the visitors as well, and yeah, kind of made the library into a different space, like more a space of encounter, and yeah, it was really, really interesting for all of us, really.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it makes me think of what Fred Moten has talked about, the consent not to be a single thing, you know, an ongoing refusal of standards imposed from elsewhere, meaning that you can define Blackness for yourself.
Yes.
And there can be a kind of space of commonality, and as well as thinking about Edward Glissant, thinking about what it means to be in relation with each other, to have, you know, to allow for difference and opacity. That it doesn't mean a kind of flattening.
No.
So I think that's that sounds like it was quite an amazing encounter. I'm just going to see if I have it in front of me, because I read one of the quotes from one of the participants, which I thought was quite beautiful. I believe she was a dancer. Just give me a moment as I look.
Jennifer Hart, maybe.
Yeah, she said, yes, exactly, Jennifer. She says, for her, finding her position as an artist within the global African diaspora meant to keep reinventing and reimagining what liberation looks like for our current time, our current ways of living, the sociality of that way, of that living, which, you know, it actually made me think of Djibril Diop's film, right? Because he talks about reinvention, and he's also talking about reimagination. Those are the two things that seem to be like super powerful inside of his film. So it made sense when I saw this. I was just like, wow, that sounds so beautiful. Because I think it's also this thing. It's like when you are invisible, or when you don't have a space, you know, you have no choice but to kind of reinvent and to reimagine. That is the thing that is common amongst all of us. We understand this kind of burden of trying to exist and trying to be visible. And that's why something like a library that allows you to see yourself and see yourself with complication, with complexity, is such an important thing. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, this is just all things that just, you know, this is all brought up for me. The last question that I have, because I know Annabelle's probably thinking, we need to wrap up, we need to wrap up.
Sorry, we need to run. We are nearly to 1 hour already, but the conversation is so great, but I'm sorry, we really need to finish with the last sentence.
Yeah, I'm going to be short. I'm going to answer quick.
Okay, so the last question I have is, like, you know, thinking about, you know, River Noir, when they started, they were doing print publication. That was what was possible in their time. In your time, or in our time right now, there's this whole space of the digital also informing the physical. So I'm interested about how these two things operate, because I was looking at the 2017 edition, the print edition, that was for what is it? It was for Documenta. I think it was timed around Documenta. Where in the, you know, in the byline, it talks about how you're noticing that web traffic. There was a lot of web traffic towards the section of the website that was talking about opportunities, residencies, and calls for, calls for application and works. And so you decided to dedicate that issue to arts and education. So can you just, you know, kind of give us some insights as to how you made this issue, how you brought these host of voices, because, you know, you've been talking about the color, the different sort of nuances of bringing different voices together. I mean, for myself personally, I was so fascinated about the fact that you brought Kwesi Goulet, who's the curator from the Johannesburg Art Gallery, where he was talking about fall movement and relating that to the Soweto uprising. Or how you pulled in, you know, Emory Douglas, the former minister of the Black Panthers. So, can you give us a sort of an insight as to how this came together?
Yeah, we always wanted to do an issue focusing on really different aspects of education, because, you know, as we all know, education is a very loaded and complicated, problematic word as well, because, you know, what is the education? And that's why we, at a very early stage of the Documenta, working on their program, teamed up with the education team of the Documenta. Sipake Angiama was part of the education team, and they were called Uneducation team. And we spoke to them at a very early stage, thinking about how we can produce an issue together with them, focusing on these different approaches to learning or not learning. For example, we had, as you said, these very different examples and voices included, as we really wanted to try to bring across an idea which goes beyond maybe the reader's expectation of an education issue, which goes or triggers these kind of usual suspect ideas of what do you need to learn in order to know everything, etc. And that's why we thought really long and hard about what kind of positions and voices can we bring in order to kind of break this idea of an education, and focusing on the aspect of the unlearning. And at that time, let's say 4 years ago, unlearning was very popular word already, but still not as popular as now. So at that time, talking about unlearning was still not new, but still new to, let's say, mainstream people's ears. They were like, oh, what is unlearning? What do I need to unlearn? And that's why we thought at that point, and together with the team of the Documenta, it made sense to drop it and launch it there. And in a way.
I just discovered that issue, so I'm like excited. Because I was just getting ready for our conversation today. But I definitely want to go back to that issue and dig into it, because it definitely it reflects the way that the way that I think about things, associative way that I pull in references.
Yes.
And so I think you together with Yvette have taken on what seems like an insurmountable task, to make inroads into arts education, writing, and critical thinking, especially connecting Africa and her diasporas. I mean, that's basically the whole planet. So that is definitely a very large vision. And, I think in the spirit of Bissy Silva, and also echoing the words of Angela Davis, where Angela Davis said, "I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things that I cannot accept."
Yes.
So on that note, I just want to
what a nice last word
for our conversation today.
Yes. Thanks so much. That was a nice last word.
That's amazing work to finish. Thank you so much, Julia and Missla. And we say hello also to Yvette, who wasn't able to be with us. And I would like very much to congratulate both of you for this very strong and I think very inspiring also conversation. And I keep in my mind this idea of colossal voices, learning and learning. And I do hope that a lot of young people will listen to this conversation and create their own stories and their own histories. And I really hope for that. Thank you so much to both of you. And I hope to welcome very soon in Les Abattoirs for this amazing exhibition. You are both part of it. Thank you so much. And bye to everyone. Merci à tous ceux qui nous ont écoutés et à bientôt pour la suite du forum. Merci à vous tous. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bye bye.
Merci.
Merci.